So today we will discuss about neuron to neuron communication. As you know that in the body there are millions of neurons and none of the neurons touch physically with one another. There always exists a gap between two neurons, and that gap is actually called a synapse or a synaptic cleft. So neurons communicate with one another at a junction called synapses. So at the point of synapse, one neuron sends a message to another neuron or to targeted cell or muscle. So communication of one neuron with another neuron takes place at a junction which is called synapses. And that synapse is actually a gap between two neurons. Uh, there are two types of neuron. One is called presynaptic neuron. The second one is called postsynaptic neuron. Presynaptic neuron is also called sending neuron. So this is actually a presynaptic or sending neuron. And the second one is the postsynaptic neuron, or this is called the receiving neuron. The presynaptic neuron actually sending messages to the receiving neuron. This is the postsynaptic or receiving neuron. Actually, the presynaptic neuron send messages to the postsynaptic neuron, and there is always a gap between these two neurons. The presynaptic and postsynaptic neuron have neither connected with one another. There is no physical connectivity of these two neurons. There is always a gap between these two neurons, and this gap is called a synapse. And actually, the impulses transfer to this neuron by means of synapses. So presynaptic neuron are sending neuron. This is the type of neuron found above the synapses or synaptic cliff. Pre means above. Neuron which is present above the synapses. This is called presynaptic. And post-synaptic or post means after. Neuron after the synaptic gap. So this is the presynaptic neuron, and this one is the postsynaptic neuron. Presynaptic neuron is called the sending neuron. This neuron send action potential to the postsynaptic neuron, which is called the receiving neuron. So there are two types of neuron: the presynaptic neuron, which send impulses to the postsynaptic neuron, the receiving neuron, by means of a synapses. And what is meant by a synapse? Synapse is actually a gap between two neurons. At the end of 19 or at the beginning of 20th century, there was a lot of controversy about whether synaptic transmission was electrical or chemical. So this is called actually synaptic transmission. Synaptic transmission means the impulses or messages which are passed from one neuron to another neuron is called synaptic transmission. So either their synaptic transmission will either be of electrical in nature or chemical in nature. So synaptic transmission can either be electrical or chemical, or in some cases, both electrical or chemical transmission takes place. What is mean by electrical transmission? Electrical transmission are actually messages or signaling across a synapse which involve the flow of ions directly from one neuron to another. And by means of electrical transmission, there is actually ions travel from one neuron to another. And the transmission of the synaptic transmission here are electrical in nature by means of ions. Transmission takes place by means of ions. And the second one is the chemical transmission. Chemical transmission means in case of chemical transmission, there is release of chemicals. And these chemicals are known as neurotransmitter. So here the messages are passed from one neuron, from the sending neuron to the receiving neuron by means of neurotransmitters, by means of chemicals which is known as neurotransmitters. So in synaptic transmission are either of electrical in nature or chemical in nature. It means that communication between neuron takes place by means of Flow of ions are by means of the release of neurotransmitters to the adjacent neuron. Chemical transmission is more common than the electrical one, and it is more complicated than the electrical transmission. Now let's discuss what is meant by chemical transmission. Chemical transmission actually involves the release of chemicals, messengers, which is known as neurotransmitters. So in case of chemical transmission, here is release of neurotransmitters. And what is the function of these neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters actually carry information from the presynaptic or sending neuron to the postsynaptic or receiving neuron. So in case of chemical transmission, information are transferred by means of neurotransmitter, and transmission are these impulses, are these action potential passes from presynaptic cell to postsynaptic cell by means of synapses. So for example, this is actually the presynaptic neuron, and this is the terminal portion of this synaptic neuron. This is actually called synaptic knob. Okay, so this synaptic knob actually contains synaptic vesicle. These are actually synaptic vesicle, and these vesicle contains neurotransmitters. And the neurotransmitter may be either acetylcholine or serotonin. There may be dopamine. So the presynaptic, the terminal portion of the presynaptic neuron contains synaptic vesicles. These synaptic vesicle contains neurotransmitters. What happens in the presynaptic cell? The axon terminal, which containing synaptic vesicles. In these synaptic vesicle contains neurotransmitters. What happened? The voltage gated calcium channels are the outside surface of the axon terminal. These are actually the voltage gated calcium channels, calcium ion channels, which are found in the presynaptic membrane. Across the synaptic cleft, there is a postsynaptic cell surfaces covered in the receptors, and this is actually the postsynaptic membrane, the postsynaptic neuron, and this is the postsynaptic membrane. This postsynaptic neuron contains receptors for the neurotransmitters. So what happens when an action potential or neuroimpulses arrive at the axon terminal? Once action potential they reach to the terminal portion of the axon, it activates voltage gated calcium channel in the cell membrane. It activates the voltage gated calcium channels. Once action potential reaches at the terminal portion, it depolarizes the membrane. After depolarization, the voltage gated calcium channels open and calcium ion flow enter from the outside. There are calcium ion which are present at the outside membrane. So these calcium ion enter to the presynaptic terminal, the synaptic knob. These calcium ion are present in higher concentration outside the neuron than inside, and these actually rushes into the cells. Okay, after calcium ion enter into the synaptic knob, what happened? These calcium ion, these are responsible for the release of neurotransmitter. After binding the synaptic vesicle, they fuse to the presynaptic membrane, and after fusion, they release these neurotransmitter to the synapses or synaptic cleft. After when neurotransmitter enter into the synapses or synaptic cleft, there are receptors which are found on the postsynaptic membrane. So these neurotransmitter bind to these receptor site, and again they are responsible for the opening of the depolarization of the membrane. And after depolarization of the membrane, ions or neurotransmitter enter into the postsynaptic membrane. So this is the whole mechanism through which messages or communication between the neuron takes place. This is the presynaptic neuron, this is the postsynaptic neuron. From presynaptic neuron, either neurotransmitter or electrical impulses pass, a chemical neurotransmitter pass to the postsynaptic membrane. So there are actually 6 steps are involved in this process. In the first step, presynaptic axon terminal is depolarized by the action potential. Once action potential reaches at the site of the presynaptic terminal, what happens there is depolarization of the membrane. As a result of depolarization, calcium channel and the axon terminal are open. Once the calcium ion or the calcium channels open, calcium ion flow into the neuron through the open channel. And calcium, what is the function of calcium? Calcium induces synaptic vesicle to fuse with the presynaptic membrane. Once the calcium enters, they fuses the synaptic vesicle to the membrane. And after fusion to the membrane, the neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft, and then these neurotransmitters bind to the receptors which are found at the postsynaptic membrane. After the release of these neurotransmitter bound or these attached to the receptors which are found in the postsynaptic membrane. So binding of the neurotransmitter causes channels to open in the neuron, and they resulted in the depolarization in neuron, which is excitatory. This is called excitatory postsynaptic potential, and messages passes by means of this mechanism. In case of electrical synapses, and at electrical synapses, like chemical synapses, there is a direct physical connection between the presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neuron. This connection takes place in the form of channel. This is called gap junction. So in case of electrical transmission, a gap junction is developed between the presynaptic membrane or presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neuron. This is the presynaptic membrane and this is the postsynaptic neuron membrane. So a gap junction or a channel is formed between presynaptic membrane and postsynaptic membrane. And what is the function of this gap junction? The function is that allow current or ions to flow directly from one cells to another. So here the currents or ions transfer from presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron. So this is two types of electrical transmission or two types of communication takes place between one neuron and two neurons. One is electrical synapses. Electrical synapses transmitted signal or ions more rapidly than the chemical synapses. In some cases, the synapses are both electrical or chemical. So at that situation, the electrical responses occur earlier than the chemical responses. So communication between two neurons takes place either by means of chemical or by means of electrical activity. Here, two neurons are responsible. One is called presynaptic neuron or sending neuron. The second one is postsynaptic neuron or receiving neuron. And communication from one neuron transfer to another by means of either neurotransmitter or by means of passing electrical ions. So this is the communication between neurons, two neurons. Thank you.